wait a minute, can you bring briefing books here?
Yeah, I expect
Okay.
tough questions.
Okay.
Natasha, we're all cool. Goodbye. Whoops. Is that a joke?
Matt, I'm not going to say anything.
I should have taped it down.
Switch mics.
Hello, I'm Brad Sherman from America's best named city, Sherman Oaks, and it's a thrill to be at the Best Named Homeowners Association. With me here is Matt Biasia and John Alford. With our constituent service materials, they work every day in the constituent service office, and let me put in a pitch for their work. Imagine a federal agency makes a mistake. It could happen, could affect you. You call John, you call Matt, they work very hard, they solve your problem, and then I, Brad Sherman, take the credit. That's an outstanding system. For that system to work, you need to pick up one of our constituent service guides. We've got them over there at the table. Among the things that you'll see there is, if you're going to come visit DC as a tourist, give us as much advance notice as possible. Call us when you buy your airplane tickets, not from your cell phone from LAX. We'll try to set you up with as many interesting things in Washington, ports of tour of the Capitol, etc. If you know anyone who might want to be an intern, either in my Sherman Oaks office or my Washington office, it's an outstanding program. The way it works is some young person works for me, and I don't pay them. Anyway, talk to John or talk to Matt if you know somebody who might be interested. If you know someone who is interested in going to the military academies, particularly if they're just about to start or just starting their senior year of high school, first, thank them for their willingness to serve our country at a difficult time. And second, tell them to call John Alford, who handles my appointments to the military academies. Just by way of background, getting into the Air Force Academy, West Point, or Annapolis is just like getting into any other highly competitive university. Plus, you need an appointment from your member of Congress. That would be me. So we have, the academies are each required to take one from our district. They usually take 2 or 3 or 4 because we've had such outstanding applicants. Now, I do hope you'll pick up the constituent service guide, but what you really need is our phone number. That's why we put it on the comb. And yes, I noticed that just about everybody here has more use for a comb than I do. Now, this presentation here is in a way just a teaser, because after spending 45 minutes here, you're going to say, God, I need another 90 minutes of that. You'll want to come to Birmingham High School for our town hall meeting. That's at 3 p.m. this Sunday. And please pick up one of these mailers. It's a report on a variety of things that I'm doing that affect us here in the San Fernando Valley. Plus, just in case I don't think you'd need it, but there's a map to Birmingham High School and a reminder of our upcoming town hall meeting. We also have at the table, I hope you'll fill out one of these cards. I need your email address. I will not share it or sell it to anybody, but I need to keep you up to date on what's going on. We have sent out mailers over the years, but I'm told this email thing is here to stay, and we're going to be trying to shift increasingly to keeping people informed by email. I also, if you're a veteran, please fill out our Veterans Questionnaire. You're aware of the scandal. I have to rely on all the departments of government to tell me how they're doing, and, for example, what the wait time is to see a physician at the VA. We've discovered that, at least for that particular fact, I can't rely on the information we're getting. At least I couldn't 6 months ago. And so I've undertaken, we've done a mailing, but I also want to use this opportunity to get veterans to tell me what are the wait times. What is the quality of service? And what about other VA benefits? How are those being delivered? We tend to have a feel for that because I urge people to call me if there's a problem. But now I want to go further and say, please fill out a questionnaire, particularly if there isn't a problem, so that we can put it all into context. I'm going to only cover a small portion of what's going on here. I hope you'll visit my webpage. That's bradsherman.house.gov. House is for House of Representatives, and .gov is obvious. Or email me anytime, brad.sherman@mail, that's M-A-I-L, .house.gov. For 18 years, I've been in Congress. I serve on the Financial Services Committee, and have for 18 years, and that is the committee that deals with Wall Street, deals with lending, mortgages, stock markets, SEC, etc. And the one issue I want to cover here is just how important it is to our Valley economy that we maintain and maybe even see a slight increase in home values. This isn't just important if you're buying or selling a home. It's not even important, it may be important if you don't even own a home. I realize this is a homeowners association, but nobody was checking deeds as you walked in.
I do that.
But the fact is, even if you're living in an apartment, if you're the restaurant, if you work at Solly's, back in just a few years ago, when the house down the street was selling for $100,000 less than everybody thought it would, who'd go to a restaurant unless there were golden arches in front of it? The economy of the Valley depends upon at least maintaining home prices. That's why I'm fighting for two things. The first is for Fannie, Freddie, and FHA to recognize that the Valley and the rest of LA is a high-cost area where they ought to be involved in mortgages up to a limit of $725,000, $500,000, and hopefully a higher limit than that. And even if you own a condo that isn't going to sell for that price, if the homes south of the boulevard can't get financed, the ones north of the freeway are going to see a decline in their value as well, and a decline in the overall Valley economy. Just as important is to maintain the mortgage deduction on the income tax return. If we were to lose that, you would see a 15 or 20% decline in home values nationwide. The effect on the economy would be every bit as great, perhaps greater, than what we suffered in 2008. I've also served for 18 years on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I know I'm going to get questions about Israel and Gaza, the Ukraine, maybe one on Scotland, which is having a referendum in less than a month as to whether to disunite the United Kingdom. But what I want to talk about for just a bit, and then turn it over to questions, is what's happening in Syria and Iraq. But first, let me put this in an overall context. There are people motivated by terrible ideologies in various parts of the world. And we have a limited ability to influence what goes on in the world. If you focus on only one problem, you can say, well, that's the one problem in the world. And if only America did everything on that one problem, we would solve that one problem. But the fact is, whether you're looking at the Eastern Congo, whether you're looking at Southern Sudan, or Nigeria, or Gaza, or the Ukraine, the fact is this is a world with many problems. And our ability to influence those problems is not determined by the personality of our president or how tough we look. It is determined in part by our arguments, in part by our ability to put together alliances, but also in significant part by our ability to deploy military force or to threaten to do so, and that inevitably involves the risk of casualties and the loss of money. And that is why we have got to look at the world and say there are many problems. We have a limited appetite to pay in blood and treasure to improve those. And we can't put all of that effort in any one place, because you can't just say it's all about Syria and Crimea doesn't exist or Iran doesn't have a nuclear program. So the most we're going to be able to do, particularly the most we're going to be able to do, if we're not willing to suffer 1,000 casualties a year, if we're not willing to spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year, is to try to push things in the right direction. And not to believe that, God, if only we had the right, perfect formula, the whole world would listen to us and do what we told them at no cost to us and at no casualties to our brave men and women in uniform. One other point I want to make in context is that while we're pushing democracy in the world, we have to adhere to democracy in the United States. The War Powers Act defines what the president can do without Congress and what requires congressional authority. And in 2001, I authored the amendment, which is now a standard thing that we do every year, to say that no money may be spent by the president in violation of the War Powers Act. So even those presidents who can get a legal opinion that says the War Powers Act tramples on their constitutional prerogatives are still told you can't spend money except as Congress has provided it, and we are not providing money to be spent in violation of the War Powers Act. As to this arc of conflict from Basra to Baghdad to Damascus and Beirut, we're seeing a multi-sided conflict. It used to be, well, it'd be like a Western movie. You know who the bad guys are? So their opponents are the good guys. Just to make it easy, some people wear white hats, some people wear black hats, and make a great movie in 1951. That's not the Middle East. And you cannot say that the enemy of your enemy is your friend, because the enemy of your enemy may be trying to kill you even more than your enemy is trying to kill you. We have a Shiite alliance based in Tehran, including Maliki and his followers in Baghdad, including Hezbollah and Assad, that I think is the greatest long-term threat to the United States because of Iran's nuclear program. We have Sunni extremists, Al-Qaeda, and more recently the Islamic State, also known as ISIL or ISIS, that I think are even more despicable and pose a more immediate threat, having just killed James Foley not 48 hours ago. There are reasonable forces in the Middle East that we can do business with and perhaps rely upon, such as the Kurds. And then there are those who are fence sitters, particularly the Sunni tribes of eastern Syria and northern and western Iraq, which right now are allied with ISIS. In 2007, they allied themselves with us. Prior to that, they were responsible for the majority of casualties that we suffered in Iraq. We see that Maliki has been swept away. That's a major, important step delivered to us by ISIS, an organization so bad that Al-Qaeda cut them off. It is indeed a strange place where a good result occurs as a result of the threat posed by an organization so despicable that Al-Qaeda doesn't want them under their tent. So I think there's an agreement that we want no boots on the ground. Without boots on the ground, we are not going to win some short-term smashing victory. I'm not sure we could win it even if we were willing to incur casualties of the type that we were suffering in Afghanistan with the height of that conflict and in Iraq. But it does mean that we can push things in the right direction. And there are those who cry out for some great slogan, like right after Pearl Harbor. Well, this is a problem that needs to be managed. It is much closer to the Cold War than it is to World War II. And anyone who offers, oh, if we just had this personality, oh, if we just had this slogan, oh, if we just had this strategy, then everyone in the Middle East would do the right thing, and we would achieve that with little spent in treasure and nothing spent in blood. If you meet such a person, you probably met them near one of the marijuana dispensaries, because that is the only way that you can reach that conclusion. So at this point, why don't I start answering some questions, and I know that John will tip me off when I've got only about 3 minutes to go, so I can go into my rousing conclusion.
All right. Oh, this is the microphone that is the best microphone, and we've been hiding it the whole time. Wow. Can anybody here not hear me? Wow. The blue tag next time for the police officers who we can't hear. Okay, so we've got some good questions. Just so you folks know, some of the questions will not be answered tonight because they are not dealing with this person that we've got tonight, the Congressman. They're dealing with more local issues. Some of the questions may not be asked tonight, answered tonight, because we may run out of time. So it's not my fault. I'm just the messenger here.
And we don't run out of time because we're continuing again at Birmingham High School.
Exactly.
Sunday.
Exactly. Now the biggest question most of these have to do with is that I'm sure you already are anticipating this and you already have an answer on this. It's on the front of everybody's mind as far as what are you going to do to get the Dodgers back on our television sets? I know that you were working on something and then it failed. So I'm not saying what you did failed, but we still cannot watch the Dodgers when they're playing baseball. It's ridiculous.
If you have Time Warner, you can't.
I understand that.
If you
Most of
don't
us in
have
this
Time-
room hate Time Warner and don't have Time Warner.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
The situation is this. Everybody knows.
Let's switch microphones.
Time Warner owns the rights to the Dodgers. Everybody agrees that it should be on all the TV sets, and everybody agrees that the other providers, if they're providing it to their homes, should pay Time Warner something for it. What they can't agree on is how much. And so the solution that I put forward was what you'd often do in a situation like this, such as a transit strike, or some other circumstance where two parties can't agree on a fair price, and because they can't agree, millions of people are inconvenienced. And that is binding arbitration. And with binding arbitration, the American Arbitration Association appoints 3 neutral arbiters. They listen to both sides, maybe get a proposal from both sides, examine the fact, and then they tell them what the number's going to be. And the Dodgers and Time Warner have both accepted this idea because every game that gets played now is costing them not only money, but fans. The Dodgers don't make any more money out of this except if they can get a few more people to see the in-stadium advertisements. You know, you're looking at the pitch going in. But there are people in Long Beach becoming Angel fans. This does not make Stan Kessel happy. They want to be on the air. They want an agreement as to how much. The DirecTV and the cable companies that are following DirecTV say they just won't go with binding arbitration. And I am trying to get the FCC to come in and push them into binding. I don't know what the right figure is. I just think that the Dodgers ought to be on the air.
Okay. Now I have a mic that doesn't work. Okay. Hello? All right. So, can anybody hear me? No. There we go. All right, thanks. All right, so, thank you.
And I do want to just give you some background about this. I organized a letter. I got 6 of my colleagues from Southern California to sign it. We urged binding arbitration. The LA Times reported that as a result of my efforts, we pressured Time Warner into accepting it. The Dodgers are for it, but that doesn't mean we got a solution because the other side is not for it.
Okay. We do have, it's, you covered the, what's going on in Israel a little bit. We have some questions, obviously, from very passionate people against what's going on in Israel, not supporting what's going on in Israel. And then we have other questions as far as supporting the Israel view. I know it's not an easy position that you're in. It's obviously very difficult. Just with our questions, we've got 50-50 on either side, and we've got, so would you just go through, I mean, I don't know if I should really ask these questions because some of these are very strong, opinionated, and not very tasteful in some views.
You want to offend me?
No, I'm not talking about offending you, I'm talking about maybe offending the audience. I think you should spend a little bit of time to address the negative things that are going on with Israel as far as the types of civilian targets that are happening. And then if you can just address as far as what your opinions are, what the solution is.
The solution is a two-state solution. The casualties that occur, and this is not the first conflict, we've seen this again and again, is not caused by an individual sergeant saying, I see somebody approaching me over there, I wonder how to react. The casualties are caused by politicians who seek unreasonable aims through violent means. And without a two-state, the unreasonableness of Hamas is hidden in two ways. First, nobody in the West could imagine somebody being that unreasonable in their position. And second, usually the side that is incurring more casualties is a side trying to achieve peace. That's not what's happening here. Hamas's position is that every Jew in Israel must be ethnically cleansed from the Middle East. They say that often. They say they're against occupation, which is a good code because it sounds like they just want the Israelis out of Gaza. No. Tel Aviv is occupation. Haifa is occupation. So it strikes us as odd to see people willing to see their own people suffer to achieve such an outrageous and unnecessary result. But that is indeed the Hamas position, and it has, and Hamas dominates Gaza. Even the Fatah position of Abu Mazen is this so-called right of return, which is that yes, we'll have a two-state solution, but every person who speaks Arabic who claims, and they're on the records, that they or any of their ancestors, even one, ever lived in Israel should move there. Which, of course, is another way of saying, well, we'll have a two-state solution, but there'll be two Arab states. So this conflict will continue until both sides agree on a two-state solution. Then at that point, they have to negotiate borders and a host of other things that will be difficult. But when Hamas is saying Tel Aviv constitutes occupation and we will continue to kill and die until it is removed, people in the West don't even hear them because it's such an outrage. Nobody could really mean that. Well, yes, they can. And if you listen to the Arab, to the Hamas material, they will analogize Israel to the Crusader states and say, look, it took us 134 years, but we pushed them into the sea, and we will do it again. And it hasn't been near 100 years, let alone 134. That being said, you do have to deal with the individual, with the particular case in Gaza. I was on Al Jazeera TV, and I pointed out that the owners of Al Jazeera TV, available on your Time Warner cable system, are funding war crimes. Al Jazeera is owned by the government of Qatar and its royal family. The government of Qatar is funding Hamas, And you will say there have not been that many Israeli casualties. That's not for want of trying. Every one of those rockets, and there have been several thousand, is intended to create a civilian casualty. And it does not enhance the moral position of Hamas to say that they're unsuccessful in killing as many women and children as they would like to kill. Likewise, Israel has inflicted substantial casualties on Hamas. A majority of those have been civilian. Israel makes every effort to try to prevent those civilian casualties, and if they used different tactics, they could have substantially reduced Israeli casualties but the result would have been even greater casualties on the Palestinian side. With ground forces, Israel has lost, I think over 40 soldiers. If you took out those tunnels with 2,000-pound bombs, you'd have those 40 Israeli soldiers still alive. But as terrible as the civilian outcome has been so far, imagine if Israel tried to take out the tunnels with that. The final point I want to make is this. Moral accounting cannot be done by counting body bags. If you take the position that whichever side suffers the most casualties must be morally right, then Eisenhower is a war criminal. Because there were far more German civilian casualties than American civilian casualties. There were far more military casualties suffered by Germany in World War II than by the United States. The fact is, the responsibility for all those casualties rested on a Berlin government that tried to achieve European or world domination through violent means. None of that moral responsibility rests on those who had to fight against that effort, even though in fighting against it, they caused substantial military and civilian casualties.
Okay, so we hear your position on Israel's right to defend and the two-state process. You have media account all over Europe, all over the world now, the anti-Israel and anti-Jewish stuff going on. In this room, this person's not here now, but one of the questions started, I'm just going to say part of it. Supporting a terrorist state, a fake state, Israel got us attacked on 9/11. The Jews are doing to us what they did to Europe. European kicked you out. You control our media, our government, our banks. This is somebody in our community. Hold on. But this is not just in our community, this is all over the world that's going on because of what is going on in Israel. I'm Jewish, I'm very supportive of Israel, but I'm saying, how do you fight this type of media, people in Europe, in synagogues being locked in because of people being fearful and what happened during the Nazi occupation or the Nazi control? How do we stop that ball from rolling?
First, as I commented earlier, we're not going to come up with perfect solutions to many of the problems we talk about here. Second, we have to get the word out that Israel is the side, and not universally, but the vast majority of Israelis and the Israeli government accepts a two-state solution. I think to call Israel a terrorist state is outrageous and unsupported. I think the question said that Israel wasn't a legitimate state. I'm not arguing with you, those aren't your words. That is absurd. You can say, well, Israel should never have been built on the territory it is built on. You can also say that about California. You can also say that about every piece of territory in the world. There is not a single piece of territory in the world inhabited except by the descendants of those who moved in. And whether you say the Israelis displaced the Canaanites, or whether they displaced the Palestinians, the fact is we displaced people that were here before us as well. And if one wants to say, let's turn back the clock to the exact moment when my people had the most territory, that, but I want to answer one other part of the question.
But the question isn't, the question that I'm asking is, I'm basically paraphrasing this, is there's stuff going on in the world that's anti-Jews all over the world now. Not what's going on in Israel, but that's the spark, and it's happening in the United States.
I do not blame Israel for anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism created Israel. Israel did not create anti-Semitism. And there was a lot of anti-Semitism before there ever was in Israel. The allusions there to Jews controlling the world and banking system, that's reminiscent of the elders of Zion, forgery of the czars. Those were written 200 years ago, or forged 200 years ago. So I do not think that there's a perfect solution, but I do think we have to get the message out. There's one other thing I want to deal with, though, and that is...
Richard wants us to move on, though. But
I'm going to deal with this one here. You'll let me. There's this argument that if only we served up Israel to Al-Qaeda, that they would be satisfied and happy. Al-Andalus is next on the list. And you don't know what Al-Andalus is? That's Spain. So every piece, their first demand is every piece of territory that ever had a Muslim government, and then the rest of the world. So unless you know some Spaniards that want to rename their country, the idea that you can satisfy the extremists just if you're willing to sacrifice Israel is not true.
Okay, Bobby Baker, are you here? Right there, okay. So Bobby asked, why is it the Congress has, is everyone okay with me moving on from Israel? Why is it the Congress has abdicated its constitutional legislative obligations and allowed Obama to legislate with a pen and a phone? For example, changing Obamacare in excess of 30 times. What happened to separation of powers?
There are two actors there. First, you have a Congress that has become dysfunctional. And second, you have a continuing row of presidents who have aggregated more and more power to the presidency, usually in the area of foreign policy, but sometimes in the area of domestic policy. And you have a House of Representatives that I'm familiar with that is representative. The country is divided, not near as divided as we were in the 1850s, but more divided than I've seen us since the Vietnam War. And again, people are elected for taking uncompromising positions. And if you poll people, they'll say, I want Congress to compromise. And then if you're a smart pollster, you have a few follow-up questions, and you discover people say, I want Congress to compromise and to agree to exactly what I want. That's the compromise they should reach. Then you have the Obama administration. I think they've gone too far in some areas. One problem we have is with the courts. I think as a legal matter, the Boehner lawsuit will not fly. There is no standing. But that's because 200 years ago, the courts decided they would not act as referee. Well, in a game of croquet, you don't need a referee. In bare knuckles boxing action, you want to have a referee. The courts refuse to be the referee, and so you end up with a very peculiar circumstance, and that is, if any president refuses to enforce a law by giving somebody something that they're not entitled to. Some president says, oh, you don't really qualify for that tax break, but I'll let you take it anyway. Nobody has standing to sue. But if a president says, oh, the law says you owe 15%, but I'm going to charge you 17%, then the courts will pay attention. So you have courts that have established this situation where whenever a president does something that doesn't hurt an individual who's bringing a lawsuit, they refuse to get involved. So you have brass knuckles mentality. You have a referee that's refused to step in the ring. You do see change, what should I say? Administrative adjustments are allowed in order to make a law work. But what's supposed to happen, and I think the Obama administration has gone well beyond that, this Obamacare bill is the perfect example. The bill that was passed was like a second draft of a bill that should have gone through 4 or 5 or 6 different drafts. What happened was Senator Kennedy died. His opponent, whether his successor, was a Republican. It takes 60 votes in the Senate to pass anything. They had passed this draft thinking that, oh, there's a lot of bugs in it, but we'll work it out in conference. And then the House was told, not a single Republican will help you improve this bill at all. Pass it or discard it. We passed it. Then every important piece of legislation I've ever been involved in needs 1 or 2 technical corrections bills where you say, okay, we got this major program, let's make it work. Now, Congress doesn't meet to say, how can we get together and make the bill work better? It's how can we impeach each other? How can we make the government so bad that we can blame the other side? So, I wish I could tell you that there is a solution to this. I've illustrated the reason for the problem.
Okay, we need to have shorter answers, otherwise I'm going to get in trouble for only not asking enough questions.
Okay.
So you've actually hit 8:15. Probably push it a little bit.
We'll push it a little bit.
Okay,
But,
so-
but I'll point out I gave a pretty short opening statement. Go on.
Okay, so what, Wilma, are you here? Okay, so Wilma asks, this, I know you can answer this very quickly. She gets more telephone solicitations now than before the do not call list existed. What can she do to fix it?
On the cell phones too.
On the cell phones too, that's correct.
Seriously.
There is a process, but that process is increasingly breaking down. This is an area where we need to pass more legislation and we're just tied up with knots. I don't have a good answer for you.
Ooh. Yeah, thank you. Esther Levy? Esther, are you here? Esther, if you are here? Okay. So Esther asks, I'm concerned about the trade deals, TPP and TAFA, and fast tracking, which would, as I understand them, give power to multinational corporations no matter the consequences to the people and the planet. Can you clarify the situation and hopefully do something to stop it?
In 1 minute or less.
That'd be great, thank you.
I think our trade policy has been terrible. I've called for its reversal. I opposed NAFTA, CAFTA, SHAFTA, and then I've been for China. One of the aspects of our trade bills is to allow multinational corporations to try to invalidate our own laws by going to a tribunal, an international tribunal. Needless to say, corporations the world over love that. And so they'll say, well, we'll make a concession to you, you don't have to obey our laws, and you make a concession to us, we won't have to obey your laws, and we'll just do what we want. But I think it's the huge trade deficit that this country has that is the biggest outcome of what has been a terrible trade policy.
Okay. Richard's saying one more. There's too many good questions. Jay Whitesler, you
Sunday, 3 p.m., yes.
Jay, raise your hand, there you go. This is an easy one, you can definitely answer this in 60 seconds or less. What are the effective steps that the U.S. could do to halt Russia from overwhelming Ukraine?
60 seconds.
This is an illustration of the limits of our power, particularly if we are unwilling to go all out and and we have very little trade with Russia. So Europe has to use sanctions. So far, we have prevented Putin from taking anything other than the Crimea, and his forces are losing, the Russian allied forces are losing on the battlefield now. An argument could be made for a humanitarian ceasefire, and our allies in Kiev do not want that to happen, and they are pressing forward. So, so far, the threat of sanctions has been enough to prevent the Russians from even violating Ukrainian law to bring in relief aid, let alone going beyond that. And I would point out also that if Putin had not taken Crimea, he probably would have lost his job, because then he would have lost all of the Ukraine and would have nothing to, no defense to those who say he should have stood up for it.
Okay, I understand you have a presentation.
I do indeed. Is Chuck here? Come on up.
Chuck.
Chuck Betts, the treasurer of the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association. Has been a community activist for decades. Is very dedicated to America's best named city. He helps paint out graffiti, removes illegal signs, and on the early morning on Sunday mornings, he's out removing trash and weeds along Ventura Boulevard. He's a watchdog for us on streetlight outages, potholes, and everything. And he has been doing this, I'm allowed to mention your age? 33 years.
Everybody knows.
Yeah. So one of the neat things I get to do, Chuck, as a member of Congress, is get one of the flags that flew over the Capitol in Washington, D.C. and give it to someone who's of outstanding service to our community. I'd like to give you this flag.